it's a very good evening here for us in Bangalore. Not that hot you'd expect in this part of the summer. Not it hasn't it has soured a little bit, but it's not too rainy out here. I hope it's the rest wherever you guys are joining us from. So the topic who moved my bias came out when a couple of weeks back we did a webinar with targeted towards the sales team, which talked about how to sell in the new normal. So a few of the folks who joined said, half in jest, that you guys should also talk about how to buy in this new normal. And so that's why we decided that maybe it's good time to revisit an eternally old and famous topic: who moved? How do buyers look at the entire equation? So to have that conversation, we decided to bring in a very interesting experienced bunch of buyers, sellers, and intermediaries. So that's what we want to go into right now. So who moved my bias? So as we wanted to talk through this, one of the most important points was the amount of energy we spend on sales and marketing is huge. Are we spending the same amount of energy in understanding and working with buyers? And how have things changed today? Have they changed a lot? Or have we been, this change which we are talking about is something which has been happening through all the time? So let's talk a little bit about ourselves as LeadStrategus. We're a small boutique digital sales company. We've been doing this traditional stuff of go-to-market, sales enablement and training, and marketing outsourcing. One of the things which we found over the last 1 month was that companies needed a huge amount of help when it came to understanding how to take things digital. So what we quickly did was to reorient our service lines. Social selling was a big service line which we used to offer. Sales training was also something which we used to offer. And we found that there was a huge requirement from corporates coming which said, have my salespeople use these sales tools and framework so that the sales is happening absolutely digitally. You can find more about what we are talking about there, but that's what we decided to do. So let me take this opportunity to introduce you to our speakers. I request Aval to introduce himself first.
Sure. So hello, everyone. And I hope you and your families are keeping well and safe in these times of COVID-19. I come from an armed forces background and have served the Indian Army in the Armored Corps for close to 12 years before I took a premature retirement in March of 2005. I stepped out into the corporate world and joined the BPO sector, which seemed to be booming at that time, as the head of facilities and projects. Having worked with them for a couple of months, I took a switch and joined an American multinational company, one of the largest in the world in the EPC business, as the head of facilities and corporate real estate. Within a few years with them, I took a lateral move into global sourcing and worked with them in their power sector for a gas refinery project in the Middle East, buying operational spares from suppliers across Europe for the gas refinery project. I then moved on to one of the largest real estate services companies and joined them as their head of supply chain and procurement. Slowly moved with them within into looking after their Asia portfolio for supply chain and procurement, managing over 100 clients across. With them, I also started looking at a lot of digital technologies, and I initiated and I ran a digital platform for sourcing that we branded as OneSource. I ran that for about a year and then decided to pursue my own venture. So I stepped out after almost close to 8 years with them and set up my own enterprise, which I ran very successfully with a few clients, with a few very prestigious clients that came on board and partnered with me. And I ran that business for 2 years till I decided to cash out of the business last year. Currently, I've joined Embassy Services as their executive general manager and head of procurement. Embassy Services has over 25 years of history and is an independent arm of the Embassy Group, which is again a leading real estate development firm spanning operations across Indian and the international markets. We have close to 150 clients and over 60 million square feet of property under management in various industry verticals. And we are one of the very trusted names in the IFM in India. Thank you very much.
Aval, can't seem to hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. So were you able to hear me earlier?
Till the last 15-20 seconds. Yeah.
I think we were able to hear Aval all through.
Yeah, we were able to hear Kingship.
Over to you, Kingship. Aval is done.
So, okay, fantastic. So I'm sorry, I didn't realize Aval had finished speaking. So Aval, so we're expecting Aval to talk, give the viewpoint of the buyer side of things, where he's seen a lot of us from the ERP and the software side of things reaching out to him and looking forward to his perspectives on how, as sellers, we have been dealing with him. So we'll come back to Aval in a moment.
Sure.
So next gentleman I wanted to introduce was Mr. Belwal. Mr. Belwal has had a. Why don't you talk about yourself?
Yeah. Okay. So I spent, the first 1, 2, 3, 4 that you see out there, they were all Tata Motors. The Telcon used to be actually, a business unit of Tata Motors construction equipment. So that was my first job. I joined them and I joined the construction equipment arm, which later on became Telcon, and now it is called Tata Hitachi. So I was out there in the field. I'm a mechanical engineer. I was repairing cranes and excavators for the first 6 years of my professional career. And, every evening when I come back, in a coverall with greased hands and oil all over, never ever thought I'll get into IT, but then that was the destiny. So then I moved to the automobile business unit, the trucks and buses business, in headquarter role. And with my field experience, I got assignments on transforming the dealer network, especially their service profitability, the service productivity. We took Kaizen from plants to our dealer workshops and ran those initiatives, after which we started a CRM program in Tata Motors that was to digitize and make all these interventions sustainable. That was my entry into IT, and I slowly started enlarging my role from a service expert to development, support, deployment, and everything. And it took us some time, but we made it really successful. The CRM of Tata Motors, replaced all the dealer systems and set out, like, even before the word cloud was there, set out something like a cloud for all the dealers of Tata Motors. Even today, this is the world's largest automotive CRM with about 50,000 users working in 5,000 locations. And that stint basically paved my way for becoming the CIO of Tata Motors and take on a larger transformational role into the rest of IT, which is specifically ERP and infrastructure areas. So that journey continued. I became CIO of Tata Motors in 2009, moved to Pune for a couple of years, and then started working on aligning the IT strategy to the business strategies which had been formed already, and then started building out a completely grounds up IT organization, various programs, um, and as I said, aligning it really close to the business priorities. Um, we took a slight turn where we were informing the country with outsourcing. When I ended up doing global outsourcing with the JLR, almost about 300 million pounds over 5 years kind of outsourcing. And then we started moving again, as connected to the business strategies, we started looking at how fast can we deliver. So we started early adoption of stuff like cloud and mobile apps. We were one of the earliest adopters of 65, um, and we had a very aggressive digital transformation roadmap going. So in 2017, I joined G for the digital agenda that was shaping up very aggressively. But it so happened that sometime after I joined, that kind of started getting liquidated. G went into problems and all of that. My business was sold to WebTech, what you see here. So I went to G Transportation, then on to WebTech, and then I decided to come out of that to corporate and started my own advisory. So I coach CIOs in terms of becoming digital transformers. I help companies, IT companies who are ambitious in terms of growing their business multifold, and doing the basics, getting all the basics and foundations right for them to sort of catapult themselves. And I speak on areas like change management, digital transformation, etc. So that's about me.
Fantastic. So for me, I met Mr. Belwal during my AWS days, and I've been joking with him that every salesperson who's in the enterprise patch in a Mumbai or a Kolkata would have been reaching out to him, and the amount of insights you'd have on selling and large sellers and how they approach large enterprises is something which probably would be very few people be having in the market. And he has a lot of interesting anecdotes. And if you check out his LinkedIn profile and you see his Medium, he talks about much more on this topic, which is how should sellers be approaching buyers. And when this webinar is over, we will share with you some of his and other interesting links. So again, looking forward to hearing out Mr. Belwal. And now coming to Arun, who's my ex-boss. Let him introduce himself. Arun.
What a way to introduce me, King Shuk, as your ex. I don't know who was reporting to who there. Anyways, wonderful to be here with all of you. And it's I think it's a fantastic topic, very germane to what we're all facing today as professionals, as consultants, as different players in this market. What I bring to the table is 28 years of doing tech and tech consulting, working with majors like HP, IBM, Oracle, and Cognizant. So I've had varied experiences, and my experiences span selling, core product development, large-scale transformations, and of course, advisory and consulting. In my 28 years, I also pride myself in the fact that I was an entrepreneur for 8 to 9 years. One very successful and one a miserable failure. And I think I learned more from the failure than the one that was successful. So one was in the area of datacom and telecom. It was a services company, and that did exceedingly well. And the second one was a startup in the area of building an e-learning and knowledge management platform. I think we went a little ahead of ourselves and failed. If you look at my career, I've had the fortune of being part of some very interesting leadership teams that are transforming this market. I was part of the NIIT leadership team. I joined them in 2008, and the whole intent was to disrupt the IT services market that was very comfortable selling bodies and people on seats on a dollar per hour basis, not really focused on delivering business outcomes. So our agenda was to transform the services sector and see how can we sell and how can we deliver outcomes for our customers. And that was a fantastic journey that I had for 6 years. A small company like iGate ended up buying a company twice its size called Putney, and then the company got sold to Capgemini. So that was a historic 6 years that I had, leading all of the technology practices, consulting, selling, what have you. And I moved on to Cognizant, and at Cognizant, I was part of the digital leadership team. Digital had just started becoming the de facto standard. I keep saying it's moved from the context to the core. That's what's happening to digital. So I was part of the digital leadership team, and I ran a data and analytics practice globally, which was, again, a fantastic experience. Probably one of the largest and fastest growing components within the Cognizant world, which I'm very proud of, and the legacy that we left behind. Cognizant, I got the opportunity again very recently. I was invited to be part of the executive leadership team of NIIT, and most of you know NIIT as the training institute. Known is that they also have a software company, which I discovered too when I started my conversations with them. So it's gone through a very interesting transformation over the last 2.5 years. A new leadership team, a new CEO, and a new investor. So we have a private equity firm that came in and bought out the promoters, us in a very interesting spot. So I was invited to come in and establish the digital business for NIIT. What I've been doing over the last 5 months, determining who we want to sell to, how do we want to sell, and what do we want to sell, and how do we ensure that we have the capability to deliver what we sell from a standpoint. So it's been a great journey. I've known Kingshuk for a long time, and I'm really excited to be here and this very, very spirited debate with the rest of my panel members. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. What not many people here would be knowing is that Arun is the first person who initiated me into thinking about a career in sales. I joined him as a marketing person, and we used to have these very interesting discussions whether a salesperson should be an extrovert. Well, that time, 99% of all salespeople are extroverts. So he kind of put this idea in that, look, introverts can also be salespeople. The other thing which we didn't talk about right now about Arun is that he's based out of New Jersey over the last 10 years. He's also been in India for a pretty long time. So he could give us some interesting perspectives of selling and buying in US versus, or US or the global markets versus India. So looking forward to your thoughts, Arun. And last but not the least, yes, Arun. And last but not the least, we have Subhanjan. Subhanjan runs a company called PitchLink, and we call him Subhanjan Da. We are doing we do our go-to-market work for him. What I think I'll let Subhanjan Da talk.
Thank you, Kingshuk. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are joining from, and I hope all of you are safe, taking care of your families and friends, also taking the opportunity to spend more time with families and friends. I am, as Kingshuk mentioned, building this platform called PitchLink because I believe sales is the engine of the economy, and more now than ever. And when you think of sales, we have been sort of trained to think in terms of how to sell and not how buyers buy, and which is what excited me about this topic, because the buyer indeed has been moved or has moved on their own. I'm passionate about the fact that a lot of discourse around business is about fundraising today, and I believe the real strength of startups would be if they figured out how to sell, how to get revenue. Because as we all know, 1 out of 10 VC investments result in a success, which means 90% of enterprises fail. As a world, we cannot have that kind of loss of resources. I will tell you briefly about what I think, how the buyer has changed. One, the traditional sales model is based on interruption. We don't want to be interrupted anymore. We are in a permission economy. We cannot talk to anybody. If none of you signed up and came here today, we wouldn't have been having this dialogue. It's as simple as that. You came because you wanted to come. It's the same thing all over. A buyer will buy if he wants to buy. Simple. And it's also the fact that a lot of discourse around sales has been about analytics and data, but 99% of that data is collected surreptitiously. The time for that is over. We can go into that in detail. So quickly about my background. My work all my life has been in the cross-section of media and tech. I launched the first television show on technology in India way back in 1996. It was a program in Doordarshan called Infotrek. Then it graduated into a daily primetime show on CNBC, which I personally hosted for 3 years. I have interviewed everybody who you think is part of the $100 billion IT industry in this country. And I have had an interesting ringside view, which is not about running the company, which the other three very, very esteemed colleagues in this panel will be talking about. I know nothing about running an IT company, but I have some views, which is quite interesting. I also launched a 24-hour technology channel during the first bust. I brought CIO magazine to India. I was the first publisher of CIO magazine in India. I did a couple of interesting things at that point of time. I also built a multilingual visual training platform, which is what Show How To is about. I am completely uneducated, but I have 3 US patents for the technologies I developed for that platform. Yeah, that's about it. Kingshuk, thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Subhanjan. So Subhanjan could not only give us the perspective of the IT industry sales, how has it been happened. So his company PitchLink is headquartered in Toronto. So he keeps settling between Bangalore and Toronto, but now he's locked here in Bangalore. But the other thing which he does, which he didn't talk about, was he interviews a lot of these thought leaders in the sales and marketing space. So he runs a radio a podcast on sales and marketing, and so he knows exactly from a startup land perspective, from a SaaS perspective, the pulse of what is happening. So looking forward to Subhanjan's perspectives on this as we go down. So before we get into the webinar, a few housekeeping rules which I forgot to tell you. One is in the chat window, you can put your questions. Feel free to put in your questions whenever you get a chance, whenever they occur to you. We will try to answer as many of them as we can. So that's one request. The second part is throughout the webinar, we will try to put some polls, some questions in front of you, and we will take you through them. So we'll try to answer around 6 questions in the next 1 hour. And with your permission, if you can be with us longer, we can go on a little bit longer if that's okay with you. So we're going to talk first about sellers versus buyer, who is ahead, who is behind. Then we want to hear from the buyers in this panel on how do they evaluate sellers. And then, of course, I want to hear from everybody, including the seller, including the buyers. What's the biggest mistakes which we as sellers make? Then we'll go into the new ways of sales, and then have things really changed in the last 1 month, or is it a part of the continuum of evolution of buyers which has been happening for a very long time, and we just happen to notice it a little bit more now because both buyers and sellers are all at home. And then I'd like to end it with advice from the luminaries. What is the advice for today, for the next, for what to do in this work from home atmosphere today? And whenever things go back to being a little bit normal, and again, you never know what's the new normal, but what's the advice for today and what's the advice for tomorrow? So hang in there, we'll have a lot of interesting stuff coming up. Give me a second where I transition it back to a different slide mode. Okay, so let's open up the first poll. It's a survey question which is going to come up in your screen, so that you can see what we can just know a little bit more about you. So can we have the first poll which we wanted to ask you? Let me just navigate the slide to there. So yeah, so if you can open up the poll, Srajan, let's see what kind of audience are you from. Can you all see the questions? Can you see the questions come up on your screen? So please so if the question has come up on your screen, please feel free to tick on the one which is most appropriate for you. So that way we'll know we're talking about ourselves. We want to hear about you. So give us a moment where, so if you've got a chance to fill in, maybe let's have a look at how you folks have filled it up. So let me read out the results. So around 100 of you in the room. So 14% are founder CEOs, 23% are sales sets, and 29% are sales team members. So yes, we expected the major part of the audience to be from sales. We have some folks from marketing, we have some solopreneurs, we have some other folks from the strategy community. Good. So this is the first poll which I wanted to ask you. Let's know a little bit about the companies you are coming from. So I request the next poll to be opened up. Yes. So just wanted to see what kind of companies you come from. Please feel free to fill in the one which makes the maximum sense. So there's a significant proportion from large and mid-sized services firms. So nearly 50% of the audience comes from services firms. Maybe let's close the poll and let's see what the final numbers are. So yeah, so 50% of you from large services firms. There's a significant amount of small and services startups. So we don't have a huge amount of products companies, around 20% of you. So that's the audience which all of you are from. Fantastic. So having known you, let's go back to quickly asking you the first question which we wanted to ask the panel. Let me ask you, do you believe that sellers are ahead of buyers? Are they able to keep pace with buyers, or are they behind buyers? So let's have the next poll where we'll see what you as an audience group believe about the seller versus buyer relationship. So can we have the next poll, which is buyers versus sellers, who's ahead? So that's open for you now. Please start filling it in. So okay, so 40% are saying behind customers, 20% are saying ahead of customers. That's interesting. 24% are saying same level. So maybe let's end the poll. and that's a good way to begin. That the 25% in the room who believe that buyers are ahead of sellers are ahead of the customers of buyers. 40%, a bit more, say that sellers are behind customers. Good. I'd love to open this out. I request Aval to share his thoughts. What do you think? Do you really? What do you think? Buyers are behind sellers?
So, Kingjuk, it's a very interesting question, and the answer to this question is not very straightforward. So let me put it in a different perspective. So there are a couple of things that we need to first look at is as a seller, and I come from both perspectives because I've been an entrepreneur and I've been selling my product to organizations and to stakeholders. And within organizations in supply chain and procurement, I've been a buyer. So I've looked at aspects from both the angles. Now, from a seller perspective, how well do we understand the buyer and respond to their needs? That's one. The second is also how's the market condition, and whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market is something that needs consideration. The third aspect is on the buyer is am I required to buy a product or a service, or am I just experimenting in the market, and therefore while I'm giving a comfort feel to a seller, I may not really end up buying. Now, it is very important from a seller perspective to differentiate between the desire, which is that what can you do for the buyer to help him make that decision. And the other aspect is all about ownership. So when we actually check whether a seller is at par with the buyer, does he meet his needs, and am I able to make a quick sell, versus I'm struggling to make a sale because of various factors, or I approach a buyer and I am able to quickly make a sale and exit out. Now, there is an element of ownership, in my view, that kicks in. And this is something that either a seller takes to the buyer and helps him understand what they are selling to be able to garner interest from the buyer. But also it is a lot around collaboration. Now, collaboration is are you able to identify the real need of the buyer? Are you able to justify what you are selling, and does it make sense? Are you able to actually identify the influences that are within the buying organization? So for example, if you are selling a product or a service, you could have a stakeholder who will do a technical evaluation. You could have a separate stakeholder who could be a CFO who's more interested in the commercials of it. There is a user who's more interested in the actual implementation and the use of a product or a service. So you have to identify who do you align better with, and who can you develop a good relationship with. Also, there could be a coach within that organization who can actually influence, or who can actually help connect with these various stakeholders. Now, some of these factors will actually help in determining how good that seller is for his organization, also to say that this salesman or this salesperson has been really fantastic. He's gone, connected with the client, and has been able to make a sale very quickly. Or whether this product or a service has taken 3 to 6 months and it's still not converted. Or probably after a few months, eventually the sales teams has raised up their hands, given up, and then said, like, we will not really moved ahead anything. But also to a large extent is because they've not been able to identify that need of the buyer, the correct requirement of the buyer, not able to connect with the buyer, not able to shape a solution together in making sure that the selling organization meets the requirements that the buyer has and comes up to their complete expectation. And at the end of it, it's also about making the buyer feel good, so which means that while you've ideated on a few solutions together, you've let the buyer take ownership of that idea and within their own organization project as if it was the whole solution was conceptualized and driven and spearheaded by the buyer. So when you also have repeat selling, you could have a faster and a better sale. And that always helps when you establish that rapport and you have a good working relationship between a buyer and a seller.
Got you. Got you. Mr. Belwal, would you agree with him? Would you agree with Aval in terms of that it's a collaboration and you have to work together to make it happen? Or would you take a very strong stance and say, no, sellers just don't get it?
No, so in terms of answering your question, Kingshuk, I don't think there's a broad brush answer to whether sellers are ahead of buyers or not. I think it is the question is more like what percentage of sellers are ahead, what percentage are behind, and I think we've got some answers where it's a good reflective answer where most people say that we are not able to understand. I kind of I distilled, I would say, all these years of almost about 2 decades of my technology buying into a blog as well as a training program that I've taken a couple of times, and kind of came up with 5 things, and one of them is like connecting with the customer, very important one. So let me kind of go back to what do people who do well, what do they do what others don't do, and that's the customer connection. Okay, so I think we have long heard about the whole NIIT feature benefit and all those kinds of things. I think when you go beyond in terms of understanding where the customer feels that you have understood him is when you are able to understand even the challenges and risks that a customer has, okay, which will come either in the way of internally approving that or in the way of implementation, etc., etc. So, what he needs and what kind of benefits he will get by buying your technology. I think this guy knows. That's why he's talking to you. Okay. Can you go beyond and understand what challenges that he has, what kind of risks they carry, what will make them drive their outcomes out of that technology, or whatever they are buying? I think those are things that differentiate the good ones from the run of the mill. That's how I would put it.
Okay. I think again, Mr. Belwal is giving a very well-balanced answer. Let's see if the sellers are equally well-balanced or they are more on the other side of things.
I also want to bring another dimension to it, which is which is an organizations are complex. The organization that you're selling, when you say buyer is not one guy. I mean, the people taking that decision together. There are, even in IT, there are multiple layers in IT, right? There are multiple user departments. So your connectedness, as I call it, your connectedness is to take a much more holistic and much more nuanced view of how different people in different functions and different layers of the organization are looking at this, and then your ability to address those stakeholders. So when can you make feel everybody that you're connecting to their needs and challenges, and not just the guy you're talking to.
Got
Back
you.
over to you.
Okay. Arun, what are your perspectives?
As the sole representative of the sell side, this is what I think. The way I would answer it is, I've been doing this for over almost 3 decades, and I have seen a power shift from the seller to the buyer, complete power shift. And to me, I attribute it to 3 reasons. One is just the plethora of choices that buyers have today. And 2, in my opinion, buyers are significantly better informed than they were when I used to sell back in the 90s. Significantly. And the third interesting thing is, and you heard this from Aval as well, that historical brand value is not good enough. There's not enough meaning and enough meat for you to just think that you can sell, right? And people will buy. So I think this is, in my opinion, this shift has actually created a new sell model, which I think is not working, which is the really hard sell model, right? And what I mean by hard sell is very dramatic, disruptive value propositions, which I think was the order of the day for a while. I can cut your costs down by 80%. Those kind of tall promises. Those are no longer being treated with the same level of excitement as it was in the past. I think we have lost our way around spin selling and solution-based selling, which needs to come back in a different context, right? Because to me, when your basic thing is, as I think you heard from the other panelists, as a seller, you have to find ways to emote to the needs of the buyer. You really have to understand why the buyer is buying. It can't be a hammer searching for a nail. That's what is happening today. A lot of people have these prefab solutions and they're thrusting it down the buyer's throat, thinking that the buyer will buy. If there's no burning need, the buyer is not going to buy. I love what Subhanjan said. This is a permission economy, right? And I think we need to understand that it's happening across the board. You can't do anything, and you shouldn't be able to do anything without the other person's permission. So I think what has to happen, and I do believe that it is a very, very critical thing for us to think about as sellers is, how do you develop a collaborative selling model where you obviously come in with a lot of research done, where you understand where the buyer is, you understand all the buyer profiles. Don't start putting them into personas and constructs that you have as yet, but really discover the entire need with the client. And I tell you, that's what I've found very interesting, that with the digital channel and less having to deal with less travel, airports and transit lounges and what have you, and flight delays, I'm having more time with my clients today. And what I think we are doing better is doing a lot more research, understanding why the client what is the client's problem, taking a problem-solving attitude, and not necessarily thrusting a solution, but developing a solution with the client. And the client sees, therefore, clients are not going to buy from used car salespeople. They're only going to buy from experts and people who understand their business. And if you don't spend time understanding the person's business, you are not going to be able to emote with them. So I think if we can spend a lot more time on research, spend a lot more time on understanding the client context, understanding their problem and discovering it with them and arriving at a solution, we are unfortunately going to be behind where the buyer is.
Wonderful. So Arun, as a seller, give the perspective that sellers are way behind buyers today. The information, the asymmetry has moved the other way. So let's hear what Subhanjan has to say on this.
Well, thanks, Arun, for that shout out. Yeah, I think I think first what we need to understand is the buyers and the sellers' language is not the same. We have to learn a new language. It's like trying to go and speak English to a Japanese. It's not going to make sense to them. And even if we are full of it and we know Shakespeare and we know, what have you, it doesn't make any difference because the buyer just doesn't understand that language. So let's understand that there is a fundamental shift that has happened, which we spoke about, that there is this information asymmetry, and the information power has shifted from the seller to the buyer. And one important thing that Arun just mentioned, I want to touch upon that whole thing. This whole idea of a persona works up to the point when you are trying to generate MQLs, but you have to move from a persona to a person before you start the selling process. You cannot look at your buyer and think, oh, he fits my persona. He's 35, he has a wife, and he drives a car, and he is sitting in XYZ position, and so he'll be like this. I think we are mixing it all up. One of the points was that, is it a seller's market or a buyer's market? Look, let's accept that unless we are creating something completely new, we are in a buyer's market. 95% or more of us are in the red ocean. There is no blue ocean, which means you are in a buyer's market, and the buyer is going to dictate how he's going to buy. Let's have it very clear. Churn is killing companies. One of the points made just now was that it has to be a continued collaborative selling process where sales doesn't end with the sale. Sale ends with delivery and continuing relationship. It's always, all of us who are in sales know, it's always more expensive to get a new customer than to continue servicing an existing customer. Yet I'm sure there'll be stories where you will know, and look at your own experiences, whether you're using a telephone today, you're buying a washing machine, think of it in a B2C mode, and you will understand what's going on with service. And if you're not able to satisfy your customer, you're in deep trouble. Churn is killing companies, whether it's SaaS, whether it is software services, whether it is building buildings. If you're not servicing the company, the customer will churn, and that will kill you. The other point I wanted to make was, see, the fact is that, and this is not something I'm telling, all of you are aware of the Gartner data and lots of Forrester's data, which says that a buyer comes in, especially in a B2B scenario, a buyer comes into the market after he has possibly finished 70 to 80% of his buying journey. What does that mean? It means that he pretty much knows his mind. He pretty much has more information than you will supply, because he's also talking to 4 of your other competitors. Don't make the mistake that he's only talking to you. Obviously, we all know that. But still, we believe that we know something more than him about his needs. That's strange. Essentially, a sale is a value transaction process where we have to look at the desired outcome. And the desired outcome for both parties is to get extraordinary outcome out of that relationship. How do we deliver that should be our key concern. And the other quick point I want to make is that there is this whole discourse, and we have been fed on this, that we sales guys go and close sales. And this is one favorite thing. I mean, wherever I get the opportunity to talk, this is what I talk about. That in the history of selling, no salesperson has ever closed a deal. And please beat me up for this, Arun, sorry about that. But every single deal has been closed by the buyer, because if the buyer didn't sign that, there was no deal.
Got you.
Totally agree.
Arun, you want to say something?
No. I said I totally agree with Subhanjan, because in my mind, if we don't walk, see, sales is very much a process in my mind where you're walking side by side with the buyer. If you're walking behind the buyer, then the buyer is going to control you. Walk ahead of the buyer, you haven't understood the buyer. It's about walking alongside the buyer. That's what I keep telling my people. If you walk alongside the buyer, then you know the buyer's pace, the steps he or she takes, the direction he or she turns. I know it sounds very philosophical, but it is absolutely essential. And I totally agree. We cannot use this persona model. I hate it. I personally am against it. It's all about the individual. That's what I said. And we tend to put that people into these cubby holes very early on in the sales process and miss out on the nuances. And we stop discovering. The moment you slot someone into a structure, you stop the discovery process. And that's where I think as sellers we can fail. Sorry, I just had to say that.
Okay. So I think both the buyers have been very, very nice and polite, and they've been saying that, look, it depends. Arun talked about the fact that buyers are way ahead and sellers need to walk side by side. And Subhanjan is also saying that, look, you are behind, you need to catch up. Now, I'm going to take a pause and ask you some of the questions which have been swirling around. So there's a question from Amit. If seller is behind, then how will they plan for the demand? How do they do the sales forecasting, which is something many sellers get beaten up with? Arunachalam has a similar question. There are very few resources to research about the buyer need. How is it seen by the buyer to know about the problem, the pain points, the needs? Maybe Arun and Subhanjan, you want to answer that? Arun, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. The first question was on sales forecasting. Was that the question, right?
Yes.
So let's look
Yes,
at the
sir.
sales forecasting question. And my God, I deal with this week in and week out because I get forecasts from my team, and those forecasts and what I look for so I'll tell you what I look for as a business leader when I review a sales forecast. I look at how well does my team know the buyer. That's all I look for, right? So if I look at somebody forecast saying that he or she is going to close this deal, I really ask questions on how well they understand the buyer's need and why would the buyer buy? Why would he or she buy from us? Why us and not somebody else? And if the seller has a good understanding of a lot of sellers forecast. I can tell you, if I look at my career, I've seen a lot of sellers, about 60 to 70% of sellers don't really forecast well, right? They forecast very badly because they do not really spend time understanding the buyer. And they believe that they have already sold. And Subhanjan is right. It's the buyer who signs the deal. So as a seller, and if you're a seller forecasting, do not sandbag, obviously, but do not over forecast, right? You have to be confident that you understand that the buyer is going to buy from you. And then obviously you can always say, hey, there is an upside. I need to do X. What I like about sellers who are, true to their forecast, they will come and tell me, Arun, you know what? These deals, I'm very confident. The buyer and I are aligned. We know exactly what we need, the problem we need to solve. We're good to go. I've got these 2 deals where I'm still trying to understand why the buyer needs to buy and whether he's going to buy from us or she's going to buy from us. That to me is a good seller. So if you are a seller and forecasting, have that kind of conversation with your sales managers. Your forecasting meetings will go much smoother. Okay, so that's one thing that I would say. The second thing is the second question, Kingshuk, can you remind me, please? Kingshuk? Hello?
This was a question from Arunachalam, where he talked about how do you get to know about the buyer's pain points and how do you research and know more about your buyers? That was the second one.
Okay.
Maybe Subhanjan, you want to take Arun, whoever.
Yeah. You want to, yeah. Why don't we split the questions, because I think we're paucity of time.
Yeah. So I don't know if some of you read this lady called Sharon Drew Morgan, and she has a lot of writing, a body of work, which if you're not familiar with, you should look at possibly. The issue is not, rather, I'll just reframe that. It is not possible to understand a buyer's need by meeting him for 2 hours or talking to him 3 times. If you are selling a product and you have a market, or you have a what should I call, a bunch of prospects, you need to insert yourself into that prospective deal, which is going to happen 3, 6, 9 months down the line today. If you are not finding ways to engage with the buyer without an agenda, and if you cannot talk to the buyer with the clarity that you will walk out from the deal if you are not able to really satisfy his needs, there is nothing much you can do. You will be in that red ocean forever.
Thank you, Subhanjan. With this, we're going to move a bit faster forward. I'm going to go to the point number 3, which is what are the commonest mistakes which, as a buyer, you'd have seen sellers doing when they've been reaching out to you? I would request Mr. Belwal to go first and talk about what he's been seeing in terms of mistakes.
Yeah. The typical flow that you have when somebody comes and meets you is like, they start talking about, this is the product, this is the organization we come from, and we are leaders in this, and so you start talking about yourself. Okay, I think that's important. But what is more important, especially in the first meeting or even later, is to ask questions. Okay, is to know the customer more and build and build that connectedness. Okay. The second thing, the second mistake that I see people making is around, I call it authenticity. Okay, so as Subhanjan mentioned, that when today buyer is talking to you, he has probably done 70% of his buying process. He already done in terms of research, in terms of talking to his peers, in terms of understanding the market players, magic quadrants, whatever nonsense you can talk about, right? So so he is prepared, and if you think that you can sort of act your way around, that's not done. So if you try to talk what you're not, I think that's a big mistake. That's a very big assessment of you that the buyer is making, which is, are you being authentic or not? Okay. Are you trying to find excuses? Are you trying to explain something which is out there in the public, which everybody knows, the industry knows? It's actually, I have seen the best people, the best salespeople are those who come across as very authentic, honest, and if they don't have something, they admit it. If the competition is stronger in certain areas, they admit that as well. Okay. And they basically they are more around solving a problem than getting into a debate with you around how good their product is. Okay, so I would say these two are the biggest mistakes. And the third big mistake that I see people doing is not understanding or not trying to understand the customer process itself. Many times when you are actually going and selling, or the first part of selling is creating the need, you have to understand that many times it starts with whether the customer has the necessary budgets for this or not. There are things that are in customers' discretionary budget limits. There are things which are not, which require sort of you getting into a 6 months or annual cycle of that. So you need to be very, very aware of some of these processes. If you just think that you have a strong value proposition and everything, the customer says, yes, I have a need, yes, and you still see the sale not happening, it's probably because somewhere there's a gap in the process which you are not understanding, but which is a real limitation for the customer. And you approached him without really understanding the process first. So these are some of the mistakes that I see people making. The biggest one that I would still call out is, having this entire dichotomy between sales and delivery. The biggest thing that customers look for is, your ability to deliver the outcomes, okay, which were part of, because that's what the CIO is going to be assessed at, whether you were able to make a success out of an investment that the organization made or not. And if you think that your job is done after selling, then sorry, that's not how it happens. Your outcome, your success has to be, you have to attach your success not to making the sale, but to making the project go live or making the customer successful. Okay. If you're not doing that, then thank you for the next sale. You go and sell to some other customer. You would have talked to this customer. The way it is a transparent world with lots of WhatsApp groups and all. You do a bad job at one customer, the market is closed for you from next time onwards.
Got you, sir. Fantastic. Mr. Aval, would you like to share your perspective of the biggest mistakes which you have seen?
Yes, sure. I love to do that. So I think as a buyer, let me first start with an interesting analogy. Most of us would have heard the concept of a blind date. In a blind date, there are two stakeholders. Now, there are two ways of going on a blind date. One is you actually go completely blind, in the sense you don't find out anything about who you are meeting, who that person is, and so on. On the flip side, you try and research and get online, get into various social media channels to find out information about that person. Check their profiles online, see if there are any common connections, what are their likes, dislikes, where have they been, where have they traveled, what have they done, and so on. Now, in the first scenario, when you go completely blind and you meet up with this other person, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to start the discovery process while you're meeting that person and as you go along. So eventually, what you end up with is putting in a much longer time, much more effort in trying to understand the other person. Now, versus when you've done a little bit of preparation, when you found out some common points, interests, likes, dislikes, and so on, you are able to make a connection almost instantly, because there will be common ground. There will be items which would be of common interest, something that both the parties have liked, done, and so on. Now, for buyers and sellers, and from a buyer perspective, I think a lot of times the sellers just walk into the door. They have very limited understanding of the need of the buyer. They do not understand the psyche of the buyer. They maybe represent a big brand and are only talking about the brand, the positives about the brand, and how the brand has done so well in the market and the market share that the brand has, and so on. But they don't make an effort to translate into understanding the need of the buyer and how their product or a service can actually help or can actually add value to what the buyer is looking. So that is a big gap today. The other bit is that a lot of times, even me as a buyer, when I've tried to explain my requirements to a seller, my seller that has approached me has been very weak on listening skills. And that I find is one of the key elements that a seller should have, is listen to your buyer. understand in detail what he wants, what his requirements are, what is he looking for as a product or a service, and then try and align with what you have to how it meets the requirements of the buyer. Just by coming with a perception that because I'm representing a big brand, a buyer is going to buy is kind of an outdated concept and is not going to work at all. And the other thing is, as you start interacting, it's also important that you start establishing a rapport. You start building a relationship which will translate into some kind of a confidence and eventually a trust. And that trust will not develop overnight. It will take some amount of time. And that is the time where a lot of sellers, for some reason, are not investing. They feel that because they're representing a big brand, they've come with an established solution in the market, and therefore the buyer should lap it up, and the buyer should actually take it on and say, okay, where's the document? Where do I sign? And so on. And I think these are some of the mistakes that sellers are making today. And I've encountered many, many such sellers in my journey of as a buyer. There's also an element of a rush sale that sometimes the seller, because he's got a target on his head, because he's made his sales plans and he's looking at making a sale within an organization, he comes across as very strong-handed. He comes across as a very matter-of-fact, pushy, wanting to make that sale quickly and eventually get out, which at times kind of puts the buyer completely off from the seller. And even though a seller may have a good solution, but it is something that a buyer will literally sit back and take his time to really consider whether he should go ahead or should hold on and look at alternate solutions. Thank you.
Got you, Aval. So what you're saying is that there is too much of my brand is the best, too much of sales training which has gone into the head, lack of listening skills, and my quota pressure, which is keeping me away from doing what I need to do. Fantastic.
Yeah, also understanding the buyer's psyche. It's about understanding the buying need. Why is the buyer in the market? Why is he buying? What is his need? And how can I make sure that I fulfill that requirement? And that is where you have to do some amount of homework to say, is the buyer out in the market? Is he exploring other solutions? Is he talking to other people? And that your peer networks should be able to get you that. Some amount of information.
Got you. Fantastic. So moving on from there, we're going to move on to the next part, which is talking about new ways of selling that each one of you have experienced. So can I ask all of you to go, maybe Subhanjan first, just take a minute to talk through the best new ways of sales which you would have experienced, which would you think would make sellers more receptive to buyers?
Okay, so there are a couple of things. One is, as I've been sort of voicing the need for a new language, I think we have to radically rethink the sales process itself. A lot of things that a salesperson does today actually should be done by somebody else who will do it far more efficiently. For example, prospecting should not be the job of a salesperson. And I'm happy to discuss about this later, maybe in a different webinar. I think the sales process itself needs some re-engineering. That's point number one. And I'll come back to, basically I'll tie it back to what you're asking. The other thing is that we have to ask ourselves, who are we going after? So just continuing from the point I made earlier, that we need to insert ourselves into a prospective purchase or a prospective transaction much earlier than where we are doing today. Why is it that we have a 5% success rate? in sales. That's our conversion rate. That's the industry standard. I mean, we can sort of split here in terms of no, it doesn't happen 5, it's 7 or 7 or 10 or 12. I'm happy to listen to whatever you have to say, but it's a very small percentage. And to repeat an old joke, I have to say, will you go to a surgeon who has a 12% success rate of operations? You will not. Why is it that we accept it, that in sales, this is acceptable? Because we are only going, all of us, 5 vendors, 15 vendors are going after that person who is ready to buy today. So we have to be at the right place at the right time. So coming back to your question, I think we have to understand that a company or a buyer will be ready to buy when he understands he does not have the resources internally for achieving certain things which he needs to achieve. And there is no way for you to figuring out how at the nth moment when he's out there saying, hey, I need this, that's too late. You have to figure out how you will engage. See, there are lots of things happening around, right? So if you think of account-based marketing, one of the points that Jagdish made is that you're not selling to one person. You're actually selling to a bunch of persons, a bunch of people in the buyer side. So you need to be able to use tools which allow you to start the discussion much earlier. And I do see, I do see certain companies who are trying to do that, whether with basic stuff like inbound marketing, which is when you are actually trying to identify buyer's intent early, or for example, you are doing account-based marketing, so you're quickly mapping the entire organization, the decision-making structure, and so on. And I'm sure, I mean, Arun or Jagdish will be able to talk about this much more. But I think that it's too little at this point in time. There is not enough that is being done. There are these voices like Sharon Drew or Justin Roff Marsh who are talking of the change, but it's still not mainstream by any stretch. But if you look at the trends, which is whether it's inbound, whether it's product-led growth, this is all signaling towards methods where the buyer can take the lead and help you sell. I know it is not a very good answer to your specific question, but I'm saying that we should not sort of miss the woods for the trees.
Got you, Subhanjan. Arun, Mr. Belwal, you want to add something? 1 minute, if you don't mind.
Sure. Jagdish, you want to go first? I'm happy to go next.
Okay, so I just have a couple of things. Some of this is coming out of some of the new approaches that I see come out of the connectedness. Okay, so I remember this startup that we were working with, and this guy was like really innovating on the user experience on mobile apps, and my team and my customer department started giving requirements around the typical old style interface that we used to do. And what he did was he kind of suggested and said, instead of debating over how to do this, why don't we do a small design thinking workshop? Okay. So he introduced design thinking to my team, and this was not really, he hadn't made the sale yet, but he wanted to show us, how to work with him, and he actually introduced us to design thinking. I would like, put that in the category of, something like immersive experiences which are relevant, not a typical customer experience, center kind of thing. The other thing that I've seen is, people doing the eat your own dog food kind of showcasing. That means, something that they are trying to sell to you. They are showing how they are using it internally and how they are driving outcomes. And they are actually they are becoming very transparent instead of the salespeople or the pre-sales people talking to you. If you expect, then they will even connect their architects to your architects. Okay. and they would not really try to shape that conversation. So that, kind of again brings me back to the whole question of authenticity. Are you being authentic in terms of what you're selling? Are you doing it yourself? Um, so those are the few things that I have seen. People going out in terms of building connectedness. Being more authentic, being more accountable.
Yeah, Kingshuk, we can't hear you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Arun, yeah. So Arun, if you could give us some examples of the best ways of selling which you have seen or you have done as a seller.
Sure. I'm going to coin a new term today. I'm going to call it immersive selling, right? And what I mean by immersive selling is it's not so much about you selling, but I like the way, Subhanjan put it. It's getting the buyer to buy from you. That should be the objective, because the buyer is going to, if the buyer is going to buy and you have qualified that the buyer has a need, I think your job should be all about making the buyer buy from you and not somebody else. I know I'm playing with words, but how do you do that? Or the point that Jagdish made, and I've seen this, and I hate presentations being made by salespeople where the first slide is about them and how big and how great and how phenomenal they are. It is absolutely the wrong way to start. So in immersive selling, it is all about the buyer. You have to put the buyer in the center. It's not about you. It's not about your products, but it's about you working with the buyer to help the buyer refine his problem. He has already thought about it. She's already thought about it. A lot of work has gone in. So all you're doing there is doing two things. You're one, helping the buyer refine his or her problem statement. Two, you are giving the buyer the confidence that you understand their problem and that you are working with them to arrive at the solution. And you know what? At the end of the day, the solution may or may not even come from you. I'm telling you, I have had circumstances where I have walked away, even after helping the buyer define his or her problem. I walked away saying, don't buy from me. I'm not going to be able to solve your problem. But I think there is somebody else who can solve your problem. And let me tell you, I won't mention the name of the clients. Those are the clients who have come back and bought from me time and time and again, right? So it's that, how do you establish that? I know we keep talking about it. I don't know if there's a new way of selling, Kingshuk. I think it's the old ways that we have forgotten. And the old ways has been about really understanding the buyer's needs, working with the buyer, and really empowering the buyer to buy. That's how I look at it.
Got you, Arun. Aval, have you seen any sales techniques which have flowed you and which have really excited you?
No, so Kingshuk, I think one big change that's happening today is that there's a lot of digitization and technology that is coming in. Now, when you look at a traditional buyer, some of these buyers, when they're looking to buy products and services, may not be so tuned up to how technology solutions can help them. And the market is moving towards solution selling today. So some of the new ways that I've actually looked at is some of the sellers have come in to meet me, but they've not spoken at all in the initial couple of meetings with me about buying their product, but it's about more about knowledge sharing, about educating the buyer. So educating me about what is the capability of their product, how is it different, how is it enabled through technology, and how it translates into helping increase productivity or cost savings initiatives and so on. And I think from a traditional sales point where it was just about coming in and making a straight pitch, to the point that probably Arun also mentioned, is I have looked at some of those methods, and I think it's been a real great breather to say, a seller comes in and he's not selling you something, but he's just wanting to come and educate you about the product. And whether you sell or you don't sell, whether it meets the buyer's requirement or not, it's about I have been able to educate the buyer. If not today, maybe somewhere down the line, he's going to come back to me and look at my other products. And I've already developed that trust and that relationship. And next time around, it could make a faster sale.
Got you. Got you. Thanks, Aval. At this moment, I'm going to take a few more questions which have been coming through fast and thick. There's a question from Raghav who says that, look, I'm selling an area which is AR, MR, or virtual reality. I have this challenge when I'm selling that. The first thing my customer or my buyer says is, show me the ROI of this investment. How do you deal with this ROI if you're selling new concepts? What do you think would convince the buyer? What are the things which you have done, Arun, Subhanjan? What would have moved you, Aval?
I actually beg to differ on that statement that was made, the question and the statement that Raghav is making. See, when we're introducing any new technology or any new concept, the only way to introduce it in my books is to say that there is an old way which was delivering you these kind of outcomes. Here's the new way that can deliver new kind of outcomes. For example, if you look at a machine line where defects are being captured in manufacturing, I'm giving an example to Raghav to think about, right? And today, inspection, there's a lot of inspection that happens, physical inspection of the product. Maybe there are also other product attributes that can be looked at in inline process quality control. Is there an opportunity for us to use an AR, VR kind of a solution where you can do a lot more of quality inspection using different strategies and improve the detection of defects much better? Or for that matter, if an engineer is going in and repairing an installation of, let's say, a building automation system, and using augmented reality, he's able to also layer a lot of the diagnostics that he has access to, and also access to all of the technical blueprints and blue books that can help him solve the problem faster. Then that's what you need to articulate. And there are methods for you to define the ROIs. So to me, I don't care what the new technology is. I think spending time trying to understand how that new technology is going to make a difference, doing that research and really contextualizing it for clients is what is going to get you the sale. Because yes, the wow factor will get you the next meeting because people will be inquisitive. Do not confuse people being inquisitive with their desire to buy, right? The only way you are going to get them to buy new concepts is for you to help them relate to how this new concept can make a significantly better outcome for the client in an area where there are problems. So understanding those problem areas, doing research on how this concept can change those outcomes is going to be very important. I've done a lot of concept selling in my life, right through. And I think I have always focused on, at the end of the day, clients want to know what is that business benefit I'm going to get. And if you don't have a benefit calculator, and at this point in time, let's be clear, there is a bit of information asymmetry and you can take advantage of it, right? Because the buyer is not fully knowledgeable about what your technology can do, maybe. And that's where you can go and advise the buyer saying, listen, based on my research, this is how much money you're spending in managing in-plant defects in all of your lines. I'm just kind of making this up. And I believe that your defect ratio or defect detection ability is only at 10%. I can make it 30% with this technology, right? So that kind of selling is absolutely possible. And that's what is going to get you to at least a proof of concept and the ability to prove out the value and then a sale.
Yeah. So Arun, I wanted to make a point here. I think, this is a classic case of being, let me call it like being starry-eyed by the product. I think though, even when you're talking about, I think the problem is not related to any AR, MR, VR kind of solution. The problem is what you really need to address, in my view, is to show an end-to-end picture of the entire solution. Let's say, for example, if you're going to put it out there in showrooms, right? How many showrooms? What kind of, how do you distribute these equipment? What happens if any of these equipment is faulty? How do you manage the life cycle? You will keep bringing out new products. So what is going to be my process with you in terms of an ongoing, this thing that I'll create new content for you, and how will you distribute that content, et cetera, et cetera. So those are, things that you need to start looking at, that there are elements beyond the pure solution itself. I would call them as life cycle elements. And you need to address all the life cycle elements, at least think to yourself, if the company has to do this, what all will it take? And then kind of give them an investment picture. I don't think they know the investment picture when you're talking to them, because they don't have the life cycle picture at all. The other thing that I want to say is that you are selling a product which is on experience. Okay, so I talked about eating your own dog food earlier. So can you create an immersive experience, something that's about what it does, how it does, etc., etc. Which basically tells them that, hey, you know what, this can work for me. So it's just a few thoughts without really fully knowing what you're doing or how you've tried to sell so far.
Got you. Just from a time perspective, we are at 7:30, which is when the webinar was supposed to end. We can go on for 15, 20 minutes if the panelists are willing. But just wanted to check with you, guys, can we go on for 15, 20 more minutes? You can just mention that in the private chat. Aval, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I think from a buyer perspective, when we talk about ROI, most of the times our focus is on a cost benefit analysis. But today, I think there should also be a lot of emphasis on the value benefit analysis. While cost will always be important, but it is also about what is the value that the product is delivering. Now, while AR and VR are newer kind of concepts in the market, you also have to look at industries and applications and what is the value that can be generated out. Now, value, say in an implementation in an industrial setup or a warehouse setup, could be reduction in manpower or the effort or the overall management. In some other industries, it could be something else. But if it delivers adequate value that excites a buyer, I think that will be of interest. The second element is also about the partnership. Now, for newer technologies or newer products which are in the market and not too many adoptions have happened, there is very limited peer feedback on the acceptance of a product, and therefore in terms of partnership, there could also be different models of looking at how you want to take a product to the buyer and how do you want to sell that product. Now, it could be either a joint investment where you could, as a seller, say that, okay, we will make some amount of investment or hold back some of that cost, and you only pay certain cost till you are able to see that benefit, and then you pay the balance. Or it could be also, for a lot of products, also operate on a completely OPEX model where the seller organization makes that investment. And once the buyer actually starts seeing the benefit and the value, they start paying back that seller organization. So on a case-to-case basis, I think it is important that you look at how you are able to put your finger on that value and are able to convince the buyer that there is actual value in the product.
Fantastic, Mr. Aval, fantastic, Mr. Belwal. Subhanjan, you want to say something?
Yeah, just 2 quick points, Raghav. Raghav's question, right? This.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Raghav, two points I'd like to make. One is that when you are selling, if it is truly new technology, which means the value is not well known in the market, you need to sort of see where your early adopters lie, because early adopters will be thinking ahead. They will be keeping touch with, like just now Aval mentioned. See, if you're selling AR VR and you're trying to go and sell it to somebody who really does have other bigger problems and trying to solve bigger issues, he's not going to get excited about AR VR. So the point is that you need to find out those early adopters to whom you can sell, and that's how value will be established. That's point number one. Point number two, whenever you are doing something new, sort of like what we are doing, if you have a new approach, it's extremely important to continuously talk to prospects very early into the journey. You need to start talking to them and start capturing their vocabulary into your own language, which will help you communicate the real benefits those early users are seeing, and that's what is going to resonate with your prospective users. That's all.
Thank you, Subhanjanda. Folks, we are noting all your questions, and we will try to gather all your questions together and answer, if not from the panelists, at least from us at LeadStrategus. So we'll take care of your all the questions which you have been so putting forth with so much of pain. One more question, which is from the other side of things. I think it was from Udit. He asked, what do we do if you're in a red market? Red ocean, where there is not too much of differentiation between the others. Arun, Subhanjanda, you want to answer that?
There's in fact my submission has always been that you can differentiate no matter which market you're in. So in fact, interestingly, this cast my mind back, God, how many years? 30 years ago. When I was in business school, learning with a professor that some of you may have heard of, a guy called C.K. Prahalad. He was the one who came up with this whole concept of core competence. Brilliant guy. He actually told us that all you MBAs think that you should be that the business school is a sausage factory for corporate America. Think again. He said the meat packing industry and even janitorial services is as sexy and as exciting as working in the Silicon Valley. So that resonated in my head right through. And I've always believed that you can create differentiation in any market, right? Take something like, I don't know how many of you are vegetarians and non-vegetarians, but let's just talk about something like chicken, right? Venki's Chicken, which is a classic story in India. He was able to take chicken and convert it into a brand, right? Out here, there's Purdue Farms that did that many years ago in the US. So all I would say is, folks, there are multiple ways and dimensions in which you can differentiate. Service differentiation, especially in the IT services market, is a key part of giving the customer confidence that you can deliver. So execution and delivery. Somebody spoke about it. I think I was also browsing through the questions, and I think I'll bring out that question here, where he said, you know what, my delivery guys are not aligned. That's a problem, right? That's what you got to fix. And I think that's unfortunately a change that is happening in the IT industry that I'm not in agreement with. In the old days, you actually sold and delivered. It was an integrated approach. So when I went to someone like Jagdish as a seller practitioner, I was able to guarantee to him that I can deliver what I'm selling. Now with the separation of sellers and separation of delivery folks, which I'm starting to see more and more happen, I think they're losing that connectivity. That connective tissue is being lost. So I would say, folks, look at every part of your value chain. and I'll tell you, the first moment of truth, I'm just borrowing a PNG term, is when you are meeting the client and you're giving the client the confidence that you know his problem. So even in a commodity market, the trucking business can be considered a commodity market, or the trucking business can be a highly differentiated offering if you understand what the client wants to do from a logistics standpoint and you are able to solve his logistics problem, right? So it's about how you skin it, guys. There are multiple ways. So look at your entire value chain. Look at every touch point that you have in delivering your service. There is an opportunity to differentiate in every aspect, right? And anybody who says that, oh, you know what, insurance is in fact, I used to have this very interesting conversation with some of my insurance clients. They used to say, oh, insurance, we know what is going on. We are on top of our business. It's a very tough play for others to come in and differentiate. We know we have already established ourselves, and then Lemonade shows up, right, and can issue a policy for you in 10 minutes without any blood work, pre-work, nothing, right? And that completely disrupts the market. So I want you to know that if one of you thinks that your business is commoditized and not differentiated, think again, because there's somebody with a hoodie sitting in the basement who thinks otherwise, right? And I'll give you a simple framework that I co-developed with the Sloan School of Management. I call it the Stairway to Heaven framework, and I'm happy to share it with some of you. It's a framework which talks about how do you create disruptive models. And there's a tendency for people to either disrupt the sell side or disrupt the what I call as the efficiency side, right? So if you're a GE type of company, you're only thinking of leaning, and there's that much leaning you can do. If you're a sell type of company, there's only so much of differentiation you can keep doing on the sell side. But if you can simultaneously disrupt your sell equation and your supply side equation, right? That's when you can create disruptive models. And there's a simple framework that I use, bundlers and improvers and disruptors. I'm happy to share that, Kingshuk, to you, that you can share with the rest of the team. It really makes you rethink about how can you be differentiated and disrupt in the market. So that's my quick 2 cents on it, Kingshuk.
Fantastic. Mr. Belwal, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, I would agree with Arun. See, I think the biggest. Okay, so let me kind of go back to some points which were made earlier. So first thing is that, in a market where there's an information asymmetry between buyers and sellers, the brands work. Okay, and today we see brands are really working hard to keep up with their reputation because the buyers are so well connected, whether it's consumer markets, on social media, or whether it's on on WhatsApp groups, what I call as private social, in the B2B markets. There is no longer any information is asymmetry between buyer and seller. So buyers know as much as sellers know, right? Now, in that case, now how do you take advantage of it as a seller? Is by creating advocacy. Okay. And I would say, if in today's world there's one single biggest thing that you want to work on, and it actually is not that simple because it has many other things that you need to work on, is work on customer advocacy. That every customer that you work with, okay, this guy is going to, if you request a recommendation from him, he's going to recommend you to 5 more people. Okay. Now that comes out of that advocacy can only come out of if you really execute well and deliver the customer outcomes. So the best way to differentiate yourself is to deliver great customer outcomes, okay, and not really focus on selling. And this is exactly what Arun was also saying, that earlier there used to be a connected issue between sales and delivery, which people are losing. And I see, sometimes going as bad as that, when there is a long sales cycle, 1 year or more, then after the sale is done within a quarter or so, the salesperson is kind of has gone out of round and some new salesperson comes, which is just to protect, any kind of commitments which are not on paper, where there may be a moral binding, etc. So I would say, that's like going backwards in time. Okay, you want to make sure that you deliver not just the dollars, but also the outcomes or the dollars for the customer. And I think that's the biggest way to differentiate in my view.
Kingshuk, I will have to drop off. It was a very spirited discussion. Thank you all. I will have.
If you have a minute, can I ask you to just give us your 1 minute advice on what should the sellers be doing today and tomorrow?
I think the entire time we've been suggesting and advising, I think. But I'll tell you this. To me, if there are two big takeaways for sellers, one will be about focusing on the buyer and not on yourself in the selling process. I'm telling you, don't worry about selling your product. It'll get bought. If you are emoting with the buyer, focus on the buyer's need. Do not sell. Never start your presentation, as Jagdish said, with a slide that talks about how big and how great you are. Not relevant, right? Not at all relevant. Listen to what Aval said. He's also a very strategic buyer in this market. He said, I will only talk to people who understand my problem. So if you don't go in with that problem-solving mentality, don't bother, right? Tell your sales managers, and I think the confidence you need to give your sales managers is that you understand your client, right? And you understand the people that you're talking to. You really know why they're buying and how they are buying and why are you positioned for them to buy from you. So sales forecast, I know, is always a challenge, but it's more important for you to forecast accurately as opposed to forecasting numbers that you don't make. Nobody likes that, right? Nobody likes people dropping their forecast. I don't like my salespeople dropping their forecast. So your forecast is a reflection of how well you know your clients. Remember that. And if you can follow these simple principles of being collaborative, walk side by side, as Subhanjan said, it's a permission economy. Remember that. And don't slot people into profiles. Sell person to person. Understand the buyers and the diverse buyers that you're selling to. And the fact that they are going to buy from you and you're not selling, I think you should be fine. Thank you again, Kingshuk. It was a fantastic and very spirited conversation. And I hope the listeners enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. And thank you
so much, Arun. We'll just go around the table very quickly, very silent. Thank you so much, Arun. We'll speak offline. Aval, you want to give us in 1 minute your biggest advice to sellers? And we quickly conclude after hearing from Jagdish and from Subhanjan.
Sure. So I think one common element that we've all been focusing on in the last hour and a half or so has been build relationships. And when you're looking at building relationships, it's about taking the time to connect. Don't just do a lip service. Don't just say, oh, I've connected with a buyer, but it's a hogwash. You actually start talking to the buyer, start meeting them online, offline, outside, start building that relationship. That will develop that trust that yes, the seller will be there in times of need. Uh, and like Arun said, focus on the buyer, focus on his requirement, his need. Don't just copy paste of what you have and expect the buyer to buy just because you're a brand, just because you're bringing something or you are in the market. It has to solve that problem of the buyer. It has to take away that pain point of that buyer. It has to make the life of that buyer simpler, and only then that sale is going to happen. And that inputs will only come when you have a strong relationship that you build with the buyer. So my 2 points.
Fantastic, Aval. Thank you so much. Subhanjan, you want to go next? We've been keeping you silent for a very long time.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Why not? So I will pick up on what Jagdish mentioned about authenticity. I will add to it transparency. See, there is no place to hide. You cannot do bad service to the customer and think that it will not be found out. You have to be upfront with your weaknesses when you are engaging. So you have to, and that's also something like Aval said, how do you build trust? Nobody's going to trust you because you have spoken to him like 3 times or 5 times. Some point I was making earlier. Trust is not such a easy to get thing. I mean, you don't start trusting somebody because he was nice to you. I mean, we believe that being nice is building trust. And I completely agree that the big chunk of the trust today is derived from the brand. So if you are not a brand, if you can see that why companies who are building new category defining products are so focused on building their brand and the brand's voice. I don't want to go into examples, but if you just look around, you will know. So one point is be transparent and ensure that you are not interrupting your buyer to tell him your story, because he's not interested. You have to figure out ways to not interrupt him or to tell him your story with permission. And lastly, and I'm not telling this in any order, you have to figure out how you can make buying easy. It's extremely complex for a buyer to identify the need, decide that funds will be made available, get consensus from all the stakeholders, and then go out and actually start procuring. It's a very complex process. Can you make his life easy? Can you make his life better? Can you help him navigate that journey much easily without friction? Can you ensure that you are not adding friction to his process? Think about it.
Fantastic pieces of advice, Subhanjanda. Before I request Mr. Belwal to speak, folks, there's going to be a survey which is going to come up when we end. Please, that's our only request for you is please fill up the survey. I mean, we have done this at a public level without the only hope that we are able to share some knowledge. So the only way we can improve is if you fill up the feedback form. The moment this thing ends, that will load up. So we request you to do that. Mr. Belwal, your final thoughts for today.
So I wrote a blog about it. I took some trainings around it. So that blog link maybe you can share later on with the audience. But I just want to play back a couple of things and then maybe some tangible advice in terms of what exactly you need to do. So I think the biggest point is about generating customer advocacy. That's the one big thing that you want to focus on. That a customer you work with, a customer you sell to, you collect dollars from, will recommend you more customers and will be able to talk about it to other customers. Now, towards that, what creates that is the first thing is authenticity. Okay, be authentic. Respect the fact that the buyer has more information than you, so you can't act your way out of it. Okay. Second thing is connection, build connections. I disagree with a question that was asked that there are not enough sources of information. I think today it's a very, very transparent world. Hundreds of sources of information that you need to tap into. So do your homework. Go to the customer well prepared. Find common ground, build a connection, and talk to a variety of people in the customer, not just the guy who's going to give you the order. Okay, so that's building connections. And finally, and the most important thing again is execute flawlessly. Take accountability of execution. You may be the sales guy, you may not be responsible for delivery, but keep an eye out on is the project going all right or not? Is the customer driving the outcome that you promised or not? And don't think you don't have power as an account manager, either account manager. As an account manager, you still have you can ask questions around within the organization if things not doing well. Be the advocate of the customer. generate the advocacy of customers for you, your brand, as well as for yourself, because you may be working for a different brand tomorrow and you still want to be able to go to the same customer. If you want to generate customer advocacy, you have to become the customer advocate within your own organization. You do all these things, then what you build, what I call as a, focusing on decades beyond quarters. Okay. Some practical messages is, and this is I considering the fact that more than about 50% people are from large organizations. Focus on account management, through account management, which is empowering your account managers to take an end-to-end view of the customer and let them engage beyond sales in terms of interviewing the customer who's having trouble with it. And that means that you do life cycle there. Okay. And again, focusing on large organization, I think there has been enough of nonsense around, product being sold to a customer and then a SI coming in and executing it, and when it doesn't really all line up together, then there's a finger pointing between the product and SI. I think this is something which may be bringing the big guys out there. That's where small players are taking advantage of it. Big guys, you need to address this problem in terms of getting your governance model better in terms of taking accountability of success of the customer or delivering to him. And then please bring your nonsense aside and don't talk to the customer in terms of what problems SIs and products have between themselves. Those will be my advice. A little long, but that's what I think.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Belwal. Arun, if you're still there, Subhanjan, Aval, this was a very, very insightful conversation. What we will do for you is we'll try to see if the quality of this comes out well. We will be happy to share that with you. If we don't do that, we'll definitely share with you the excerpts and the big learnings from this. We could also request the panelists to answer some of those questions which have not been answered, and we'll try to consolidate that and try to answer that to the best of our ability and share with all of you. So thank you once again for joining us. Please join me in giving a big thank you to the panelists here with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And do fill up the feedback form, folks, as this screen ends. Okay. Thank you so much. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.